I know we've had some fantastic speakers so far, but I think this is going to be our highlight, no pressure. I'm going to introduce you all to Ms. Katrine Kirk, who is a truly remarkable person. I met Katrine just in last September, actually, in Florence, Italy, at an event organized by Sir Liam Donaldson on behalf of the World Health Organization. And Sir Liam, as you remember, is a fellow Simnovator. And Katrine and I, we were on the bus. You know, you go to these events and there's, you're getting the bus to the beautiful venue that we're going to. And we started chatting, and she started telling me about kind of her background. And I was really struck by her bravery through her struggle with an aggressive lymphoma, her commitment to patient safety, and her engagement with regard to the patient experiences of healthcare. And we talked a lot, and then just towards the end, when we were getting back to the hotel or so forth, she said, oh, and we started talking about ballet, and her love of ballet, and so many of you know that I have a love of ballet too, and so I was just like, this is a friendship that's going to go on forever. The friendship was secured, okay? So, Katrine, thank you so much for coming all the way from Denmark, arriving just yesterday, so I hope you got a good night's sleep. And Katrine's going to speak to us for the next few minutes about a topic, dancing on thin ice, a patient's strategies to beat the dismal odds. Thank you so much, Katrine.
Thank you. Straight off the bat, I am a little bit nervous about this. I've given literally about 400 talks about my patient experience, but I've never given a talk that's quite like the one I'm going to do today. So anyway, here goes. Imagine if you were told that you have a very serious illness, that there's a chance of surviving, but only if you will accept a very harsh and very risky treatment. What would that feel like? That happened to me a long time ago, back in 2000. And it came completely out of the blue. There was nothing in the cards that would indicate that I had a propensity to fall seriously ill. But the moment it happened, something very fundamental changed in my life. I was transformed from being a happy, competent wife, mother, friend, PhD student. I was completely at ease in my life, and suddenly everything, it seemed, was taken away from me, and I had no idea how I was going to get through the next few weeks or months, or whether I even had years to think about. And apart from dealing with the very difficult health issues and all the anxiety of that, something else happened that surprised me at the time, quite profoundly. And it was the transformation process. I stopped being the person, Katrine Kirk, and became instead the patient 0306672614, which is my social security number in Denmark. And along with that, I mean, apart from being ill, a lot of other things seemed to happen. Like, I could no longer wear my own clothes. I had to wear something that was not something I would have chosen myself. And I was made to eat what the hospital had on offer. There weren't many choices. They decided when I slept and when I was awake, because lights were turned on at 6 in the morning. I don't think they do that anymore, but my whole sort of rhythm across the day and night was regulated by hospital routines. There was no privacy. Nobody knocked at the door before they entered. They would just walk in. I couldn't move about freely. I had to be disposable and available in my hospital room in case a doctor decided to come by. Of course, nobody could tell me when the rounds were going to be, but I had to be there in case it suited the doctor to look in. So much of my freedom was taken away. And I was in a sense, I was quite fortunate that I wasn't really sort of ill. I had this terrible disease that might kill me, but I was feeling all right. So I had more energy than many other patients do in that situation, but I felt terribly sort of encumbered by it all. The situation was I had lymphoblastic lymphoma, and it had relapsed. I'm jumping into my story after the relapse. Upon relapse, only about 5 to 10% of patients survive this diagnosis. And the only way to do so is to have a bone marrow transplant with a donor. What would you want to know in that situation? I mean, what sort of questions would you be asking? I wanted to know everything there was to know about the treatment itself, about the disease, what was happening in my body. Of course, I was almost done as a PhD student in a different field. I was in business administration. But I was trained to read research, and I was an independent thinker, and I was able to sort of just crash the medical library and really read up on things and become very engaged. Not everyone can do that, but that's one thing I did. But the other question I had was, okay, so what are the factors? What really matters if I'm going to increase my odds of being in that 5 to 10% who survive this illness? So I asked my doctor, so what characterizes the survivors other than having the gold standard treatment? And he just kind of looked at me and he said, that's all we can do. We can give you the chemotherapy, and we can give you the transplant, and we can just hope for the best. And I thought, I'd been sort of intrigued by the idea of the placebo effect. It's considered a source of error in medicine. We have to eliminate the effect of mind over body when we look at what is effective in medicine. It makes sense. But it's also interesting how ill-reputed the placebo effect is, because it does prove that there is a mind-body link that matters. And so I asked my hematologist, who I had a really good working relationship with. He'd been my treating doctor through my first course of disease also. I asked him, what can I do myself? And he sort of looked at me and he said what almost every other doctor says. Well, if it'll make you feel better, you can, have some massages or whatever. But it's not considered important. So I started looking at the research literature that was available about alternative treatments, acupuncture, reflexology, weird things with crystals and nutrition and psychological approaches to illness and all of that. And the more I read, the more disappointed I became by the sort of the standard of evidence in these studies. They were very anecdotal, small samples, poorly done, all of that. But I did sort of garner from everything that I was reading that there are things that matter. Medicine works very much by assaulting the body with scalpels or with harsh drugs. And the idea is, let's sort of hammer the pathological aspects of the body, and then there will be a little bit of collateral damage. But it just makes so much sense to me to think that if we're going to withstand, say, harsh chemotherapy, then it must matter that the body is as strong as it can possibly be to withstand the assault. So I was thinking about nutrition, and I read up on it, and I made a plan for how to eat in order to prepare for treatment with the bone marrow transplant especially. I also realized that there are many, many anecdotes that indicate that the patients who pull through the best are psychologically strong. They're not depressed. They do things. So I did things for my mental health. I tried to journal. I made sure that I had something to laugh about every single day, etc. And I thought, okay, I also need to be physically strong. This is a very taxing course of treatment I have to go through. So I started taking up yoga, which is incredibly boring. But I thought I'd be able to do it. all respect for people who, I do practice yoga nowadays. I'm sort of more and more mature, so I've realized that it does have. But the thing was that every time my yoga class entered, these men and women who were about my age would enter the same room with a ballet teacher, and they would start doing classical ballet. And I was so envious. And I used to do ballet back when I was a teenager, and I stopped when I was around 21 or something. And by this time now, I was 33, and I hadn't put on a ballet slipper for about 12 years. But I started I decided, well, what the hell? I mean, so what if I can't do everything anymore? So I started training ballet as well as yoga. And the thing about ballet is that it's not only good for the body, it's also very good for the mind, because there's something about the combination between movement and music that's really good. So by the time that I was going to have my bone marrow transplant, I felt pretty much ready for it. And let's pull this out. We're going to do a little simulation here. And you, no, just leave that. But you may turn on my computer if you want. Okay, so it was a lot like this. Now, going in for a transplant, I was constantly hooked up to an IV pole. The room was tiny. The way they do this is they hammer you with the strongest chemotherapy the body can withstand, and then they once your bone marrow has died, which is, for those of you who are not in healthcare, the bone marrow is responsible for producing your blood cells. So once your bone marrow has died, they give you like a blood transfusion with cells from a donor, and they take hold in the they take hold in the bone marrow and then start growing, kind of like a sourdough. And they start producing new blood cells. But you're very, very vulnerable during this time. There's zero, your immune system is completely flat out dead for a while. And so you need to be in a hospital room for about 3 to 5 weeks, which is completely sterile. There was very little space. I was in a bed, and there was a nightstand, and there was a chair I could sit in, and then there was like a table on wheels with lots of sort of nurses' equipment, and that was it. I brought along a little ghetto blaster, remember those? A long time ago. And then there I was. I tried to prepare also by making sure that I would have entertainment. I brought books, I brought some music I could play on my ghetto blaster, and I made sure that I was going to be visited by friends and family as much as possible. But still, on the day that that I first lay down in that bed, I was thinking, am I going to die in this room? That was as likely an outcome as pulling through. But of course, then I had prepared. And although several nurses had tried to talk me out of it, I had devised for myself a little training program. And what can you do? What sort of exercise makes any kind of sense when you're when all you have is like 1.5 meters by about 1.5 meters, and that's all the floor space that you have? And the answer is, of course, very obvious. That what I did was I had a little training program that I used. So, and this is where it all potentially gets very embarrassing. Hang on. All right. I even had a bar. Okay, you're ready to go. So I would do this. something like that. And one day there was a physiotherapist who had been assigned to come see me. I'd been told that during these bone marrow transplants, most patients become quite dejected. They have difficulty sort of sleeping at night and staying awake during the day because it's such a traumatizing event. And I had thought a lot about that beforehand and thought, okay, well, I want to make sure that I'm physically tired so that when I go to sleep, I can actually sleep. And so this physiotherapist pops in just as I'm doing one of these exercises, and she looks at me and she says, well, I'm here so that you can lift your legs up in bed and stuff, but I think I'll just leave you be. Now, the nursing team around me had never actually seen a patient be so active during a bone marrow transplant, and I pulled through with flying colors, and I had almost no complications, and I was psychologically completely sound all the way through. And I think part of it was the dance, but part of it was, of course, also just having prepared as actively as I did. Because getting a serious diagnosis is a life-changing event for anyone. And figuring out a way to not be passive in that is so important in pulling through in a good way. The word patient means, quite literally, to be patient. It's a passive word. And the traditional view in medicine is that patients are passive recipients of treatment. And I think we really need to rethink that. Not everyone can do what I did, but everyone can do something. And for those who quite naturally sort of are flung into depression or anxiety from serious illness, they need to be encouraged to find their strength at whatever level it is, and to use their resources to put up a good fight. And in order for that to happen, I think we need to stop defining healthcare as being only about hammering the body, but also about rebuilding the body as much as we can, even during treatment, because that's the only way that we can actually get the best possible clinical outcomes too. And that was really just what I wanted to tell you.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. And I was so moved when you told me this story on that bus in Florence, and to have everyone hear it here. And I know you've given this talk many times, but to me it felt like I'd never heard the talk before. It was just so passionate and so inspired.
Thank you.
Really, really grateful to have you here, and thank you once again. We have a small gift. For you to remember McGill.
Thank you.
For us,
Thanks very much.
Again. Thank you so
You're
much.
welcome.